This is the Wikipedia page for Sid Meier, the, I guess, famous video game developer. He's maybe one of the most recognizable video game developers of all time, at least in name. Because even, for example, Shigeru Miyamoto is maybe the only other video game designer who has anything like Sid Meier's fame as an individual. Most people think of Sid Meier's either turn-based or optionally turn-based strategy games, especially Railroad Tycoon and the Civilization series. Really, both of them are series. And most video game historians will also point out that he developed Pirates back in the 1980s, and it was one of his first strategy games. But this is a fraction of his work. A lot of people don't even realize this. His other games aren't even unknown. So if we look at a list here that Wikipedia has, Silent Service, you don't get too much better known than that. There's Pirates on the list, of course. Red Storm Rising. Most people associate this with Tom Clancy, of course, because it's based on his novel. F-19 Stealth Fighter. I've certainly played one version of this. I could track it down again. And then we have the classics, Civilization, F-117 Stealth Fighter, Colonization, which is not really the same thing as Civilization. It's a somewhat different game about colonization of the New World. Civilization 2, which is maybe my favorite of the Civilization series. Magic the Gathering. Of course, the cards are not his invention, but it's interesting that he did the video game. Sim Golf. Look at that. That's another one that everybody forgets. Gettysburg, Antietam, Alpha Centauri, Civilization 3, which I think I'm going to do a playthrough of. It's very, very, very hard, but I do have it. There's Railroads, of course. There's Railroad Tycoon 2. There's that. Where is Railroad Tycoon 2? Maybe they forgot it. Yeah, it looks like they forgot it on the list. It's not actually on the list. It's from 1998, Railroad Tycoon 2. It's not on the list here. And the remake, or one of the remakes of Pirates, because he did one for PC and one for mobile. I guess this means Android, I suppose. And then he did a plug-in for the Civilization 4 engine to recreate colonization for a modern computer in 2008. I also have this. Civ World. I do not know very much about this. It's saying it closed down in 2013 anyway. Civilization Revolution 1 and 2. Civilization Beyond Earth. Starships. That's gotten a lot of attention, although it's already 3 years old now. And then Civilization 6, which is still making its rounds. It's still the current version of Civilization. But it is also the most expensive one just because it's the newest. But especially in the early games, he was very balanced about letting, any nation of people, any civilization, have pretty much the same chances at the beginning because the worlds are randomized. And if you've read the work of Jared Diamond, I'll look him up here too. Jared Diamond isn't a video games developer, but he is an author of history books. And what he points out quite regularly is that the geography that a country occupies is much of what would have made it historically successful. There's his most famous book, Guns, Germans, and Steel, which is specifically about that topic. And Sid Meier takes the same approach with the Civilization games, that you have to deal with whatever territory you have, and of course, because you're a modern person, you do know how to get around those disadvantages, whereas historically people didn't, especially because they didn't know how big the world was around them and so on. But what's also fascinating, at least given all the controversies about religion presently, is the extent to which he's neutral on the topic. Now, I don't normally talk about religion on the channel, but it's interesting from the standpoint of the game Civilization, because as you can see here, he is an evangelical Lutheran, and of course he defies a lot of the negative stereotypes of evangelicals. He doesn't just that he goes to this church, he composes hymns for them. So he's very active in his church. And there's nothing in the game which suggests that he is biased to any particular religion, in the game anyway, nor is there any of the controversial views about evolution or about anything like that. The only evangelical thing you could argue is in the game is that the game, every version of Civilization that is based on the original series, and not Alpha Centauri or anything like that, starts in 4000 BCE. So that's, to many evangelicals, that's considered the beginning of the world. In the game, however, and you'll see this when I do the playthroughs, it's simply discussed as the beginning of civilization, which is also a little bit inaccurate, because a lot of historians now believe that at least agriculture and states began closer to 7000 BCE. But there are no written records of these civilizations, so they're strictly prehistoric by definition. But there are some other biographies of him you might want to look up before we move on. This one is in Game Boy magazine. Pretty old, 1999. But his biography is interesting, even if you start that far back. But see, here's what he says. Computer games like Duke Nukem let you blow things to pieces, but Civilization lets you taste the same thirst for power that drove Julius Caesar. Which really means power to build or destroy. And he correctly says the game can be tremendously addicting. I think this is actually the author of the piece here. He mentions SimCity here. SimCity was one of Sid Meier's inspirations for the game Civilization. If we look at the other inspiration here, by Francis Tresham, it was a 1980 board game that took, according to this article, literally 8 hours to play. No, excuse me, 3 to 12 hours. 3 to 12 hours. Setup time, 15 minutes for 2 to 7 players. So because of the depth of this game, they eventually discontinued it in the US, actually. In America, we don't have a lot of time for 12-hour board games, unfortunately. Or fortunately, depending on your perspective. But this was the ancient world only. If I can find the year it ends in here. Ends at 250 BC. So you never get even to the birth of Christ in the original civilization. But nevertheless, this was his other inspiration besides SimCity. I'm sure I don't have to talk about SimCity very much here, but the point is, SimCity was real time. It ran continuously. And the reason that I always had trouble playing it was that you don't really have time to think or plan the way an actual city manager would. You're always on your feet. And Civilization, being turn-based, was much more of a deep thinker's game. And I didn't necessarily do very well in it, but it certainly was something very different. And as Sid Meier, many people who have played the game and so on have said, Civilization always makes you want to play one more turn. In the coming videos, I will play through as many versions of Railroad Tycoon and Civilization as I can actually get to run. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge, and this will not happen in 1 week. This will be several months long.